You think all this can last? There's a storm coming, Mr. Wayne. You and your friends better batten down the hatches, because when it hits, you're all gonna wonder how you ever thought you could live so large and leave so little for the rest of us.
You sound like you're looking forward to it.
I'm adaptable.
Hello to all my Magic the Gathering enjoyers out there, specifically those of you who enjoy playing Vintage on a $30 budget. If that sounds like you, you've come to the right place because this is $30 Vintage MTG. So we got another tournament report today. Luckily, we get to skip the part where I tell you that I went 1-3 because I was not able to attend last night's event. So this is all going to be hearsay. This is going to be going on Simon's posted tournament results. So Simon, thank you again for gathering that and posting that, as you always do. I actually went and I played Super Smash Bros. Melee for the Nintendo GameCube. No one tell Nintendo that we still play that game because they'll make it illegal. If you are wondering how I did in that tournament, I went 0-2 and I didn't win a game in bracket. That game was also very hard. So I'm going to be going through this top 8 kind of for the first time, top 8 plus, you know how we do things here. And we're going to be talking about mostly how the format is dead, has been solved, and we'll never play it again. Unfortunately, we figured it out. Mono Black, High Tide. That's it. Those are the only decks now. It's actually illegal to play anything else, so pick one of those two decks and stick to it. Just kidding. There were a lot of other weird decks floating around. I will say though, there were a lot of mono black decks. There are still a lot of mono black decks. We had 27 people in the tournament, and there were. Give me 1 second to consult the Oracle. Oh, that's not bad. There were only 5 mono black decks. We don't hate that. And so there were 5 mono black decks, which is crazy. Some of them were similar. There were 3 that were pretty similar, 3, 4, and there were 1 or 2 that were pretty different. And we had, for the first time in this format, 3 High Tide decks. 2 of them were mono blue. 1 of them splashed a color. We'll get to it. I think maybe I'll do a deep dive on High Tide later, but for now we're going to start and just kind of go through the top 8 decks. First I'm going to go ahead and congratulate our players and say what they played, then we'll go through the deck lists. The reason we're doing it in this order is because I need to pull up my Discord window that shows me the player names. So first place, Preston on Mono Blue High Tide. That's the list we're looking at currently. Second place, going undefeated for the second week in a row, that's Doug on Thopter Gifts Combo Pile. Third place, Connor. Crap, do I have to edit that out? I try not to say last names on here. Connor on Mono Green Tron, a very experienced and powerful Mono Green Tron player. Excellent. Fourth, Holden on Mono Black Aggro. Makes sense. Fifth, Will rocking Martyr Proc. Even in a very difficult meta, it's still staying up there. Sixth place, this is a new one that we haven't seen before. It's Selesnya, that's green-white for those of you who don't know. Hardened Scales. Seventh place, Mono Black Aggro. And eighth place, Mono Black Mid-Range. Seventh was Chris, and eighth was Jem, both Mono Black experts. And then just missing top 8, ninth was Evan on Mono Black 8-Rack, and 10th was Michael on Blue Red Wish High Tide. So there is a lot of Mono Black. That's kind of the elephant in the room. And apparently a lot of High Tide, which kind of came out of nowhere. Is there some secret High Tide Cabal where you guys sit around and discuss untapping lands that I'm not invited to? Like, do we coordinate 3 High Tide decks? I'll let you guys in on a little secret. There is a secret High Tide Cabal, and it's me and Everett, and I almost showed up and played the 4th High Tide deck. Shh. Don't tell anyone, because I might play High Tide in the Win a Taiga tournament. Shh. Alright, so let's talk Preston's list. When we get to Everett's list later, we'll talk about the differences. Nah, maybe we'll do it now. I don't know. So I've been goldfishing Everett's list some. I actually have it right here in front of me. This is what I do when I get bored. I goldfish it. It's felt really cool, but there's a couple key differences, and a couple things that I think are really interesting in Preston's list. And anytime I say something like, I'm not sure I do this, or I don't know about this, just assume that I'm wrong and Preston is right, because Preston went 4-0 and I didn't. So, a couple interesting things here. First off, you got to remember that Mind's Desire is restricted. The card's very, very good. It's insane, actually. Who knew a Storm card being good? But we only get one copy of it. Gosh, there's a lot to take in. I've been playing, like I said, I've been playing a very different list. The deck looks to, for those of you who don't know, the deck looks to cast a High Tide, which makes your islands tap for additional mana, and then you play cards that let you go whoop, 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 and untap your islands and make more mana. So things like Frantic Search, you get to untap 3 lands and you get to tap them again. So it's basically a ritual when you have a High Tide active. You get to play Pour Over the Pages, which is something that Everett and I weren't playing, and it looks to be pretty good. You're drawing 3 cards, right? So it's better than a Divination, but you're discarding 1. So it's you're net positive 1 card, but you're getting some filtering in addition. And if you have 1 High Tide active, you've put 5 mana into it, and you're untapping 2 lands. You're getting 4 mana back. That's not bad, especially, a lot of the time the card advantage translates to another ritual, or if you have 2 High Tides active, it goes crazy. We're playing a nice cantrip suite: Preordains, Ponders, Gataxian Probe. Ideas Unbound is good because you mostly negate the downside. Generally, you're going to cast this on a turn where you're looking to win the game. Or if not literally win the game, put your opponent on 0 cards in deck thanks to Brain Freeze, so you don't really care about the discard the cards portion. Solve the Equation. Pretty big budget investment, but it does find, most importantly, Mind's Desire or Brain Freeze, or High Tide, right? Cruise and Dig are both present here. I think that's smart, especially in the world we live in where there's 100 mono black decks at every event. These cards can, I imagine, bail you out of Hymn to Turok. And I will say, Preston, I think, had some pretty good matchups this past Thursday night. Let me see if I can actually find his tournament report. Round 1, Simic Infect. Sounds like it was a close game, but the days... Oh yeah, there's days in this list. Have you seen that? That's really cool. It's one of the things that I'm not sure I necessarily would think is correct. I wouldn't want to pick up my islands, but I think especially on an unsuspecting opponent, you may be able to protect like your critical combo turn, because a lot of the time I think the way the play pattern is going to work out, you're going to cast High Tide, your opponent's going to let it resolve, then you're going to cast like Frantic Search, and your opponent's going to try to counterspell Frantic Search, because then they've got like 2 cards out of your hand, right? Because High Tide is now dead. If you just happen to have a Daze and you get their counterspell, then it's good for you. The thing that I think is a real downside is that you have now picked up a land, so you have 1 less land in play for your turnabouts and your Frantic Searches and things. I need to talk to Preston, and Preston, feel free to respond if you see this. I'm curious what your average turn is, because in the list that I've been goldfishing, we tend to go for it on turn 3 or 4. It's about a 50-50 between those. So if you're going for it on turn 3, I really don't think you want to daze and pick up one of your lands, because then your Frantic Searches are bad. You're no longer untapping 3 lands. But I think that this might be looking to be a little bit more consistent, a little bit more resilient to some of the hate with the double delve spells. And when I say some of the hate, I mostly mean discard spells, Hymn to Turok, Inquisitions, etc. And I think that dazes work really well with that plan. Like if you're trying to go off on turn 4 or 5, I think that daze probably makes it a lot more consistent and lets you beat some interaction. Impulse is something we talked about as well. As a 2-mana cantrip, I think that Everett and I were playing Peer Through Depths, which digs 5 cards, but you can only get an instant or sorcery. Impulse digs 4 cards, but you can get a land. I think the ability to get a land is important because you want to get to 3 4 or 5 lands here, but you also don't want a ton of lands in your deck, so here we're at 18. So Impulse versus Peer might be a critical part of that. For Mission Briefing, this is kind of like Snapcaster Mage, but a little bit better, because we get to Surveil too, so it's potentially 3 cards in the graveyard to fuel our Delve spells, which we're playing both copies of, and it lets us flashback like a Pour Over the Pages, or God Help Our Opponent, our Mind's Desire. I think that's really powerful. Similarly, Commit Memory works well with the Mission Briefing Pour Over the Pages like package. It also means there's a little bit of value in brain freezing yourself, which is something that can happen because you get to flashback the memory portion. That's pretty minor, but honestly in this list, I could see casting an early Stormcount 3 Brain Freeze during like like the weak part of your High Tide turn, which then turns on your Treasure Cruise and maybe finds a memory, and then when it's time to actually kill the opponent, you can probably find a Mission Briefing to flash back the Brain Freeze. I'm not saying it's going to happen every time, but it can happen. I played $100 budget CEDH for a while. There was a big tournament that I was gearing up for, and I played Blue-Red Vadric Temporal Archmage Storm. It was also playing Brain Freeze, but honestly, the biggest thing I used it for was to mill myself for like 9 or 12 cards on an opponent's end step to gas up my graveyard so that I could like hit a big Past in Flames. So the concept could be similar here. So I really like that you have the Mission Briefings to get back your Brain Freeze if it is discarded or milled or something. Sideboard, I think Teferi Mage of Zhalfir is really cool. Notably, my only issue with it is that it's not... it can be counterspelled, and it is a decent budget investment. It looks like we're planning to beat counterspell decks with 4 Mystical Dispute. That card's really dropped. I love that. And I think Teferi's part of that as well. I do wonder if this is just better as Defense Grid. I'm not sure. That's definitely something to think about. But my gut says I would go Defense Grid first. I do think there's some value in it being a 3/4 with Flash, because your opponent's going to sideboard out all of their removal. So I don't know. It's worth thinking about. Anyway, super exciting that High Tide took it down. I'm a little bummed because I was ready for that to be my secret technology at the win at Taiga, but I'll just have to find something else. I think this list is cool. I love that there's multiple different versions of it, and I've talked a lot about how I think the format needs to get a little more unfair. So it's cool to see some Storm decks doing really well. So Preston, excellent deck building, excellent play. Very excited to see more of this. Next, in second place, this is Doug's. Oh man, I just got tired. I haven't even looked at this very much, and I've talked about it before. So this is Blue-White Thopter Sword, right? So Foundry plus, what's that other thing? Sword of the Meek, to make a Thopter for 1 mana. We all know that combo. And like we talked about, I know that Doug was really a big fan of playing restricted cards. So Balance, you see here, Tinker. I believe we have some Delve spells somewhere in here. Oh no, we're off the Delve spells. I meant to talk to him about that. That's interesting. We are playing our 1 Sol Ring, and we are a snow deck. It looks like since the last time we played, we got rid of our Batterskull. Shorakai did stay, though. I think that's our primary Tinker and Anchor target, in addition to Sword of the Meek and Thopter Foundry, of course. We're playing powerful interactive spells in Swords and Counterspell, advantage spells in Thirst and Gifts. Lion Sash is cool. I don't know. I think that's a Tinker and Anchor target that is just straight up good and is Grave Hate. The sideboard looks super, super refined. I know that Doug likes to bring in Triskaidekaphile when people side out their removal, which is super smart. I got some readers in here. I got to read some of these. Light of Day. Okay. Everyone pick up your copies of Light of Day now. Mono Black enjoyers, go ahead and start sideboarding. 1 in a black sorcery, destroy target enchantment or creature, lose life equal to its CMC. Feed the Swarm. You guys are going to start needing that because we are now a Light of Day format. Good luck. Glaciers. Similar concept, but instead we're beating the crap out of red decks. I know if there's one thing Doug hates, it's losing to red decks. See Circle of Protection Red. I'll read this one. Oh, okay. Okay. Similar. Doug, could I ever sell you on a story circle? I know it's 3 mana, but it catches all colors and it's 1 to activate, so I personally like story circle. I've played that a few times. Anyway, this deck is too big brain for me. I could never play it and do well, but I love that Doug is. This deck is a menace, honestly. I've seen people play against it, and quite frankly, it's very hard to know how to play. It's got a lot going on. There's a lot of deep lines that involve, tutoring with gifts ungiven, making those piles, and the deck is inevitable. The deck is looking to crush you in a couple different ways, right? Like making a ton of Thopters. Shorikai, I think, can win the game on its own. The card's very powerful. Keep in mind that for 1 mana, you're making a 1/1, but you're also drawing 2 cards and pitching 1 card. So it is card advantage and it's card filtering. That's a lot. It's a lot of draws to see the right cards. And then there's Slam Dunk sideboard technology. Scary deck, scary pilot. Let you guys know, I think Doug's going to come over tomorrow and we're going to talk some $30 vintage. Maybe make a little content. We don't exactly know what that's going to look like yet, but hopefully there's something coming down the pipeline there. So Doug, good job. 3rd place, all right. Connor is rocking mono green Tron. So I've talked a lot about Tron. Maybe not on the channel, but in person I've talked a lot of mono green Tron, mono green Cloudpost, and it looks like we're off the Cloudpost thing. I know that Urza's workshop is new. It's kind of crazy, actually. It's like another Tron land, So it makes a bunch of mana. You do have to have some artifacts laying around, so I guess you have to manage your stars and spheres. And I was talking to Connor between rounds pretty recently. I think it was 2 weeks ago. And we talked about how this deck's different from like modern Tron or like Legacy Cloudpost. And the difference really is that your threats are good, but they're not insane. Like in Cloudpost, you get to cast like an Ulamog or an 8-mana Ugin. Similarly, in Modern, you get to cast 8-mana Ugin or like 7-mana Karn. And those just deal with like a pretty wide array of board states. Here, we're casting Endbringer, which is a pretty insane card advantage engine, honestly. But like Steel Hellkite, Bane of Bala Gad, Mere Battlesphere, none of these cards are necessarily like beating an impossible to beat board state, although Oblivion Stone does do some of that. So I think Connor and I were talking about how sometimes it takes a couple of these threats to close out the game, but a lot of them even buy some time. Like a Mirror Battlesphere is going to buy you time. So I think that might affect the threat density a little bit. Luckily, Ancient Stirrings helps find all of our threats, basically. Once Upon a Time as well. And it looks like the Elvish Spirit Guides, I imagine, are often used to cast a fast channel or Sylvan Scrying just to get set up a little bit more, which I think is really cool. They also help cast your Once Upon a Time. So, I don't know. This deck's cool. I like that it's doing well. It's nice to see, I guess, a familiar face. And I know that people like to joke about like getting natural Tron and stuff, but I feel like you can't be as upset about it when it's a Steel Hellkite compared to like a Karn. Because if you can't answer a Steel Hellkite, that's kind of your fault, right? So, all right. I'm glad to see Tron make a top 8. I gotta go faster because this video is getting long. Deck number 4. Luckily, this one's easy. Whose list is this? This was... All right, this is Holden's Mono Black Aggro. This one is Dark Ritual Plague Engineer, so it's similar to Chris's list in that. It's playing a lot of 1-drops and then 3-drops of Dark Ret out, as well as the discard package. I really like the inclusion of Smuggler's Copter. I feel like that helps with potential flooding out, as well as making a little bit of resiliency to board wipes. No Lost Legacies in the board. Wow, we're teched for the mirror with Dark Betrayal. I'm going to vomit. That's disgusting. So we're teched for the mirror, but like I said, there's no copies of Lost Legacy, so maybe a little bit weaker to things like Enchantress or Storm. Not sure how I feel about that, but you can always add Lost Legacies. Deck 5. This is Martyr Proc. Let's see what Will's up to lately, though. What's changed? So we're still on 4 commies, even though they're getting expensive. Still on 4 champion, even though they're getting expensive. Although, I don't know what happened. We're at $28 right now, which is surprising. Loyal Sentries are new. Oh, that's funny. I like that. Basically a Death Touch creature. 1 Paladin class. I think it's a nod to being a little bit afraid of counterspell decks. It looks like the Tragic Poet made it in the main for this one, which is a really cool loop with Abiding Grace. Sideboard, I don't know what Nova Cleric is. Oh, watch out Enchantress players. We now know what that is. That's crazy. Notably, it does blow up Abiding Grace, but I think that, if that's the situation you're in, you're still happy to do that. Because if you have a Nova Cleric, you probably don't play your Abiding Grace until after you pop your Nova Cleric, and if you decide to pop your Nova Cleric with an Abiding Grace in play, it's probably worth it to you. Love the Sanctifiers. And then I think the Chalice of Life Relic Vial split is to have 2 different ways to get around not being able to attack for whatever reason. I think that this beats a Solitary Confinement because it's loss of life. This doesn't because you have to target, whereas this is non-targeted loss of life. So really a lot of big brain plays there. Love seeing Martyr Proc continue to evolve. Will's been just tuning this deck so well for so long. It's kind of scary, actually. I think he's been in every game state that you can be in a half dozen times. So when you talk about a master of a deck, if I had to choose one player who was the best at one deck in this format, which it's kind of hard to be the best at a deck in a format, right? I think Will on Martyr Proc is the most experienced pilot of a deck in this format, which is really cool because it's not that big of a format currently. So I don't know, just really cool to see it continuing to evolve. You can tell it's a really refined sideboard, right? It's not like when I make a sideboard and I'm like 4 Graveyard Hate, 4 anti-storm cards, 4 more anti-burn cards, then 3 cards I like. You can tell some thought went into the numbers on this, which is really, really nice. So Blossoming Calm, perhaps we're ready for Storm, actually. Next deck. Alright, so this one's sweet. This is Green-White Hardened Scales. $13 Hardened Scales. Good luck, everybody. It's a Luris deck, which is insane. Ranger class gives really strong advantage, honestly. I like that level 2, which is very attainable, works well with Hardened Scales, and Conclave Mentor is kind of our redundant copy, by the way. But then Ranger class also potentially grinds games out because you can cast all of your cheap creatures from the top of your library. Dramoka's Command, I think, is an incredible beating sometimes. Love fitting a Gavany Township. That's very, very cool. I like Seal of Primordium with Luris Companion. I think that's super smart. Same with Tormod's Crypt, obviously. Let's look at these threats and see if there's anything really interesting here. Yeah, Iron Apprentice is cool. Yeah, I was going to say that it's very similar to Servant of the Scale. I think it's better because you can cast off turn 1 planes, which I think that was correctly identified. It also appears to be cheaper. Swarm Shambler. Card seems very strong as well. Kind of like our Hangerback Walker. Conclave Mentor, it's our redundant Hardened Scales. Luminarch Aspirant, very strong. And Skoos, I like that. Being able to main deck 4 Skooses gets a lot done in this format. I actually think this deck's super sweet. I'm probably not spending as much time as it deserves because I'm kind of in a hurry just to get this done, so it's not a 2-hour-long video. But excellent deck. Love to see the innovation. Excellent work, John. Let's check out... Oh, I opened it twice. This is Chris's Mono Black aggro deck. Differences between this and Holden's, I know, is the 4 Lost Legacy. I think that makes the deck, especially because you're powered by Dark Ritual, it makes it a lot better against kind of like unfair things like Storm and Enchantress. Turox, I don't know if we saw Turox in Holden's list. Looks like maybe more and different sideboard discard. Additionally, there's no Smuggler's Copters. Curious to speak a little bit more on that one. But, very similar, very good. Then here we've got Gem. This is a more mid-rangey version. Note that we are not playing Dark Rituals here, right? I think that's the biggest difference. We are just making our land drops. We're on 24 lands in this deck, but notably 6 of them have activated abilities. Whereas in the aggro lists, it looks like we're on 20 swamps here, and we are on 20 swamps here. So no Dark Ritual. Here, no Dark Ritual, but we're up 4 lands, but they have utility. We're also Sign in Blood to get card advantage. Gatekeeper of Malakir is cool. Misery's Shadow, also crazy. Similar discard package. No Plague Engineers in the main. I think that's reasonable, probably. I know the Custodial Lich in the side. 5's a lot of mana, but just being able to become the Monarch is very, very cool. Looks like we're on the Dark Betrayal technology here as well, so the mono black players are consuming themselves. I also saw a crazy sideboard card. I think Andrea Mengucci posted about it. It's not from... Never mind, that's not a mono black sideboard technology. It's black to cast. It's a legacy thing against mono white initiative. It's a trap where you can pay black, and you exile a white attacking creature, and then you make a token copy of it, and then you exile that token copy. So it's like good against initiative things. It's not relevant, but I didn't want to leave you guys hanging on what I thought of. Anyway, mono black. It's good. If you want to win, you can play it sometimes. Last in our top 8. Nope, that is last in our top 8. Great job, Jim. Now we're going to move on to some oddballs to let you know that the meta isn't all mono black and high tide. We had, believe it or not, I don't know how people keep coordinating this. We had 2 Lantern Control lists on Thursday night. Drew played Dimir Lantern Control to 19th, and Roby played mono black Lantern Control to a finish that need not be mentioned. Sorry, Roby. Better luck next time. But let's see what's going on in Drew's list. I haven't really looked at this before. So it's a blue-black artifact-based deck. If you guys aren't familiar with Lantern Control, you want to use Lantern of Insight to reveal the top of people's libraries, and then you want to use Codex Shredders, Ghoul-Caller's Bells, and Pixis to make sure that your opponent never draws a good card for the rest of their life. Notably, in Modern, I think that maintaining a ensnaring bridge lock so that you don't die to the creatures that are on board is super important. Then you use your lanterns to prevent your opponent from ever finding artifact removal. We don't have ensnaring bridge in this format, so it makes me wonder about the viability of this deck, but it seems like there is a way to do it in the format. Spell Skites, they help protect your critical pieces as well as, again, blocking. Maybe it's a bit of a nod to no ensnaring bridges. Inquisitions has some good interaction. Forging the Anchor, I really like that. It's cool to see this outside of Affinity, but with 16 non-creature artifacts, all 1-drops, and Spell Skites, your forgings are going to be pretty good, and they're going to find you what you need, right? If it can find you the cards that your deck is built around and named after, it's probably pretty good. Extirpate, really cool when you're milling your opponent, especially if they only bring in like a couple ways to remove artifacts, so you get to kind of take them. Then we have nice interaction. Drown in the Lock looks really powerful when you're milling your opponent. Murderous Cut looks really powerful when you're milling yourself. Same with Cruise and Dig Through Time. So shout out to Ghoul-Caller's Bell for turning both of those on. Mana base is cool. It looks like some amount of the time we're going to win the game with 1 Creeping Tar Pit. Good luck to our opponents. And we have 1 Elixir of Immortality. I believe that's just so that there's no chance of us milling out first, but I guess most of our mill is Ghoul-Caller's Bell and Pixis, which is going to hit both players equally. Codex Shredder can break the equation a little bit, so I think you're always going to finish your opponent first, but maybe not always if you're casting a lot of Forging the Anchors and Treasure Cruise. Sideboard, we got some Cries of the Carnarium to respect Go Wide decks. I'm a little surprised there's no actual factual board wipe to get creatures that are larger than 2/2 out of there. I would think like a Bantu's Last Reckoning or something might be nice, but again, I didn't play. I played Melee instead last night, so what do I know? Very cool deck. We also have Roby's Mono Blacklist. Look at that, Bantu's Last Reckoning. I promise I didn't look at this first. Looks like we're also playing Grind Clocks. That's cool. it can start milling for 1 the second turn it comes down, and it's kind of like a more aggressive way to win the game. Like it's an aggressive mill card because you can tick it up to 3 or something when it's time to start getting the job done. Notably, we aren't running any Elixir of Immortality here, I think because our clock's a little bit faster, thanks to Grind Clock. We are running Dark Ritual. I'm not sure how I feel about Dark Ritual here. I don't feel like our pieces are that critical to get out, but I guess getting a Lantern of Insight and a Codex Shredder out early lets us start controlling our opponent's draws. 1 Nether Spirit actually makes sense. That's really cool. It's totally free to do that. So I think adding 1 Nether Spirit here could make sense. The only downside being, if it does get stuck in your hand, you have to cast it, which is kind of lame. I also think for anyone playing this going forward, I personally would be interested in a Cling to Dust. I really like that card, and it looks like we're putting a lot of cards in our graveyard. Maybe that competes a little bit too much with the Delve spells in the Dimir version, but Roby, DM me if you need a copy of Cling to Dust. I got your back. Very cool lists. Then last thing before I sign off, I'm going to look at the 2 other High Tide decks. Like I mentioned, Michael played High Tide to 10th place, so just outside of the top 8. His list was actually this blue-red version, so it's honestly most of the time you see mono blue High Tide, but if you have incredible dual lands like Volatile Fjord, the Island Mountain, and Molten Tributary, the also Island Mountain, you can make it work. This list is very similar. You're playing the typical Cloud of Fairies, Snap, Frantic Search, Turnabout package with High Tide to make mana. It looks like we are playing Remand as interaction, and it can also be tricky with Brain Freeze. You cast the Brain Freeze, the Storm Trigger goes on the stack and duplicates the Brain Freeze, then you remand the original copy of Brain Freeze back to your hand, and you cast it again, but with 2 higher Storm count this time. So you can actually mill people out at really low Storm counts using that trick. Mystical Teachings is really interesting. So we're doing that to get our High Tides and Frantic Searches instead of solve the equation. And then we also have Drawn from Dreams. That's interesting. It's not a card that was on my radar for High Tide, but it is a powerful way to dig. 2 cards out of 7 does solve a lot of your problems. I think I would probably play the first dig through time over one of these is my guess, but maybe that competes with the Clear the Minds. Wish, very interesting. That's what the red is for, and we're wishing for our Brain Freeze, which is good for a couple reasons. It means it never gets milled or exiled by a Pixis of Pandemonium, which I'm told that Everett did have his Brain Freeze randomly exiled by a Pixis against one of the 2 Lantern control players, and that's just bad beats. I don't know, that just happens. Everett's variance was terrible. We'll talk about that when we talk about his deck. It looks like we're also planning to wish for a lot of Stroke of Geniuses, just to draw cards. Most of the time we're going to get mana. Oh, also notably Ghostly Flicker. Hold on a second. So Ghostly Flicker makes mana if you have a High Tide active, because it brings back 2 islands untapped generally. You can also Ghostly Flicker a Cloud of Fairies. So if you flicker a Cloud of Fairies, basic island, you're essentially getting 6 mana out of your Ghostly Flicker. Additionally, your Mystic Sanctuary is going to be really powerful in a Ghostly Flicker shell. You can put your Drawn from Dreams or Frantic Search back on top. That's really powerful. I think personally, I would put 1 copy of Mind's Desire in the sideboard here. I would imagine there would be times it would be worth it to wish for that. And I'm not sure I fully understand the Clear the Mind package. I think it's so that we can theoretically loop to kind of an arbitrarily large storm count once we really get going, but I'm not sold on that one. Very interesting. It's nice to have the Brain Freeze protected from a lot of what can happen in a game of Magic by being in the sideboard, but this version is still very soft to Lost Legacy. Lost Legacy taking your wish will strand you with no access to your Brain Freeze. I would consider playing 1 copy of Fae of Wishes as well, so that you're not stone cold dead to a Lost Legacy resolving, which is something I think is important in High Tide, and something we can talk about when we jump over to Everett's list. Anyway, Michael, really interesting take on this. I'd love to, honestly, we should get the High Tide players to sit down and have a cabal and talk about this, because I love High Tide. I love Storm decks, especially non-deterministic Storm decks. I owned Blue-Red Giftstorm in Modern very briefly, but I kind of didn't like it because it was kind of like Resolve Gifts Ungiven, and then there's like a standard pile that wins the game, basically 100% of the time. I don't really like that. I like my turns to be long and complicated and involve a lot of fiddling and thinking. It's purely out of disrespect for my opponent that I enjoy that style of Magic, though. All right, let's go check out Everett's list. I think that Everett and Doug collabed on this, and then I plan to steal it and play it a lot. I really enjoy it. This list is looking to maximize Mind's Desire. It is the most powerful card in High Tide by a wide margin. So we're trying to cast as many Mind's Desires as possible. To do that, we have 4 Solve the Equations, which can tutor High Tide. Sometimes you'll solve on 3 to set up High Tide on 4, which is fine. It's not ideal, but you can race a lot of decks by doing that, and turn 4 you have a pretty high chance of success. So Solve gets you a Mind's Desire. A lot of the time, you're going to be looking for a hand that on turn 3 you can cast a High Tide, tap 2 islands, float 4 mana, and then cast your rituals, Frantic Search, Snap, Cloud of Fairies, to get up to 9 mana. 9 mana lets us cast a Solve the Equation, and then tutor a Mind's Desire, and then and then cast a Mind's Desire. Our storm count would be High Tide, probably like Ritual, Solve the Equation, Mind's Desire. That's 5 copies. That's a little low. Ideally, we would want it to be a little bit higher, but you can definitely do that. Additionally, if you have 12 mana instead of 9, because that's just the context of your hand, and goldfishing, I would do like Solve the Equation for Solve the Equation just as a way to up my storm count. And then I would Mind's Desire, right? So if you have 12 mana, you can do that. And then once you've actually put the Mind's Desire copies on the stack, if you hit one of our 4 remands, so again, like the Brain Freeze remand trick, Mind's Desire on the stack, Storm Trigger, copy. If you then start resolving the copies down, right? When you resolve a copy and gain access to a remand, because Mind's Desire says until the end of the turn you may play that card without paying its mana cost, you still have to follow timing restrictions, but remand's an instant. So if you are able to hit a remand off of one of your Mind's Desire copies, then you can remand, target your Mind's Desire, pick the Mind's Desire back up, and then assuming you can make 6 more mana, which is pretty trivial, right? That's like 1 Frantic Search or like a Cloud of Fairies plus a Snap. Then you get to cast the Mind's Desire again for an even higher number. And usually when you cast a second Desire for like 9 or 10 or 11, that's going to lock things up pretty well. Notably, we also have Flood of Recollection, which is going to do a similar impression. If you hit that off of Mind's Desire, you resolve the original copy. And then because Mind's Desire doesn't actually exile itself when it resolves, which I think is just a mistake. I think it should exile itself, probably. I'm glad it doesn't, but it should. You can flood back your Mind's Desire and then go again. I think this is a really cool way to build this deck. I think it's really, really powerful. This is pretty close to the list I thought I was going to play. I was playing around a little bit with cutting Brain Freeze for Blue Sun Zenith, thinking that if you are consistently able to, when you storm out, make roughly 63 mana to have your opponent draw their deck, the only thing that's worse about Blue Suns over Brain Freeze in that situation is that it's more susceptible to counterspell. So then I was trying to figure out if you could regularly storm out and make 126 mana, which would be casting 2, or I guess 128 mana, which would let you 60 card Brain Freeze, 60 card Blue Sun Zenith. If your opponent tries to counter it, you can remand your own Blue Sun Zenith back to your hand and then cast another 60 card Blue Sun Zenith. It's definitely possible. You have to spend a lot more time fiddling through your storm turn. You generally, if you want to get up to 120 mana, I was finding that I had to resolve between 4 and 6 High Tides with the majority of my rituals still castable. And then you're a little bit softer to like Blossoming Calm. But the upside is that Blue Sun Zenith is better if you have 10 mana, right? If you have a hand that makes 10 mana on turn 3 and has your storm pay off your win condition, if your win condition is Brain Freeze, then you're dead in the water. You don't have any velocity to do anything. If your win condition is Blue Sun Zenith, then you can fire off a Blue Sun Zenith, X equals 3 for 7 mana. Then you get to draw 3 cards, and if you find Frantic Search, Cloud of Fairies, Snap, etc., plus a piece of gas, then you're golden. So I don't know. I'm not sure which one's correct. Additionally, Fascination. This is some technology we discussed. We wanted to have a plan for beating Lost Legacy. Cat's kind of out of the bag now, so I don't mind discussing it, but the plan against Mono Black was to sideboard in Fascination. Then if Mono Black lost Legacies, and they name prior to seeing your deck, so if they name your Brain Freeze, which should make the average Storm player lose the game and have no win conditions other than 4 Cloud of Fairies, which is not a win condition, then you would get to go for a Fascination mill out by making, roughly 60 mana, and then having each player mill out their decks, which is really smart. I think this is going to lead to, or maybe Lost Legacy lets you see the deck first. I really truly don't know. This might mean that it leads to a weird arms race or a weird back and forth metagame where mono black players will then start naming High Tide instead of the actual kill spell. Because if I bring in Fascination, I have Fascination Brain Freeze, then one Lost Legacy is not really going to stop me. But if you then take the High Tide, then it's harder for me to actually get to that storm count. It's doable. You spent some time Lost Legacying, you probably Dark Redded it out and then cast it. So you're down 2 cards and you're down a turn. So maybe that gives me enough time to get to 5 or 6 mana and do a double High Tide thing and then get enough. Or sorry, I don't have High Tide, but just get enough, especially in this deck, get to 6 lands, then fire off some number of these rituals that are mana neutral at this point. Then cast a Mind's Desire, and then buy it back. You can certainly generate enough mana to win with a Brain Freeze in that situation. So then maybe the High Tide players start sideboarding 2 copies of Helm of Awakening so that they can win if their opponent takes their High Tides. So I think that High Tide and Mono Black, and really anything that plays Lost Legacy, is going to get to a weird Tom and Jerry metagame where they're both trying to outsmart and get to the next level against each other. I may do a video that's just about High Tide because I spent a little bit more time talking about it than I expected to, but it's really fun, really cool, and I feel like there's some room for optimization. I spent a lot of time doing some spreadsheets and goldfishing and trying to optimize. I may still play High Tide for the win at Taiga, but the surprise factor is no longer there, so I feel like people will sideboard for it. Maybe I'll just play Reanimator instead, since it seems like Graveyard hates going down a little bit. Anyway, I've spent way too much time talking. I'm going to go do something else now. Thanks for tuning in. Bye-bye.